All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of M365 Voice. My name's Antonio Mayo.
I'm Sarah
Oh.
Hazy.
Oh, I guess I am still Mike Manolani.
Perfect. We're just going to keep doing this every episode. And Antonio and I are with Andy Huneycutt, and we are in Seattle for
Yes.
TechCon 365,
Yeah.
Seattle live and in person. Mike elected to not join us
Yeah, I envy
in
you.
person.
Shame.
Yeah, I know. I miss everyone there. I miss the conference. I love that conference. Just happened that too much travel.
Well, let's also say TechCon 365 Seattle this year is sold out.
Woohoo!
There's
That's
a
awesome.
great crowd here.
800 people.
Yeah.
800.
Yeah.
It is massive,
Yeah.
and the crowd is really, really wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
It's a great success to them. It's so far, we're in the middle of the conference. It's a great conference so far.
FOMO, Mike, just focus
I know.
on
I've
the
been
FOMO.
having since Sunday. Started seeing
FOMO.
all the tweets and Facebook posts. I'm like, damn it, want to be there. Huh?
Yes. Well, we're excited to have you on, Andy. And for those of you that are tuning in and watching the video, you can zoom in and see that we do know what his name is, despite what the name badge says. It's Andy Huneycutt. Don't call him Will.
I answer to any variation.
Any variation.
We'll call you Andy.
So Andy is longtime friend, first time guest on
Yep.
M365 Voice. So Andy, do you want to tell them what they won and who you are?
They've won a riveting conversation around all things Copilot. So first off, thanks for having me on the show. A longtime listener, first time participant. This is really exciting. But I've known all of you for a number of years now.
A lot more than we admit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's quite a while. But I'm really excited to be here and have a conversation today. So a little bit about me, William Andy, go by Andy. I'm an enterprise collaboration specialist for a large healthcare organization. Prior to onboarding there, I was an independent contractor for Microsoft user adoption and training, and kind of made the rounds all over North America, and spent over a decade working with companies large and small doing user adoption. I learned a lot from Sarah and from Antonio and from Mike, and sitting in on their sessions at like workshops and at conferences and their blogs and published content. So it's really exciting for me to be here and kind of soak up some more of that knowledge of in person as well as hybrid and remote with Mike.
So this is part of our Copilot series.
Mhm.
This
Yes.
is the next episode in our Copilot series. We're very happy to have you here, Andy. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've been doing with Copilot recently, or what you've been saying? Because we've seen you've done a number of webinars and posts about Copilot. You seem very much into the Copilot technology realm. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing with Copilot and what you're seeing.
So I'm an early adopter of generative AI. I was jumped onto ChatGPT as soon as I heard about it. And then as soon as Microsoft made the announcement about what was at the time Bing Chat and their foray into AI there, I jumped on board to that. And then when the Copilot program was announced, I was begging all of our decision makers to get involved with that as soon as possible. I got onboarded into Microsoft Copilot in August of last year as part of the early access program, the EAP, for my organization. We initially started out with a small pilot program in one Microsoft tenant, and that's since spanned into a much larger Copilot pilot program that's now running across a few Microsoft tenants. I'm leading the user adoption and education story there. So I spend most of my days working with Copilot in some capacity, and then still delivering Microsoft 365 user adoption and training services across the organization for our user base. As far as like other content, here delivering a workshop on Copilot. I'll be at the upcoming TechCon events, delivering more workshops there, engaging with the community, and then I am trying to just have a steady flow of content around Copilot coming out like every single week, whether it's a blog or like a carousel post on LinkedIn or a webinar or other content. And then one last thing on that, I have a YouTube show called 365 Deep Dive with my colleague John Moore. And we spend a good bit of time talking about Copilot there. But when we deep dive, it's a 2-hour deep dive where we are like really exploring a topic, and we do it live. So we get a lot of feedback from the audience.
great.
People.
Wow, a
tuning in from all over
2-hour
the world.
live deep dive session?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. We're usually wiped out by the end of it,
Yeah,
but like
I would
that's
think
it's a
so.
lot of fun. We're learning out loud, and it's really cool. And people ask questions that we might not have thought of, and we get to explore that live and learn. So it's a lot of fun.
Do you have a live audience while
Wow.
you do that?
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh,
Sounds
nice.
cool.
Oh, wow.
Mike, would you trust me live on a podcast?
Typically, no. I
I
have
don't
to.
think they.
Yeah. Gonna have to give you a couple of glasses of wine, maybe.
That makes everything more entertaining, doesn't it? That is fantastic. Mike, what do you think? I want to make sure that we make time for you to be able to talk since you're not here to throw something at us.
Yeah. So well, let's keep it like the usual, very casual. Not to fight over who's going to ask the next question, but we try not to. We always try
We always
to
do
jump. Yeah. So, it's been almost a year, Andy, that you have been involved in whether trying out Copilot, talking about it, engaged with customers. What do you look at the adoption rate right now for Copilot? Because I have a lot of questions, but let's start with adoption here.
So I've actually done a couple of webinars specifically about adoption and deployment. I actually did one for ShareGate just recently. That's mastering Copilot adoption, following up with the Pass the Mic series, which Antonio was on recently. The adoption story is really, really interesting. With my experience, it's not so much a traditional adoption story, because people are seeking us out wanting Copilot. They hear about it and they want it, versus like in other aspects, it's like we have to kind of push the adoption out to users and get them to engage in it, get them to buy in to what we're doing. With Copilot adoption, it's kind of the other way around. They're coming to us. They want this tool that they're hearing their teammates using and their colleagues using, and they're seeing the time savings that they're getting from that. And so they're seeking us out, and we're kind of having to like deploy it in a scaled and controlled manner, because one of the challenges with the adoption is understanding how it's going to actually impact the organization.
Mhm.
I think the biggest question people have top of mind is data privacy and security. And then the second one they ask is about how do we measure ROI related to it.
Exactly.
So when they come with those questions, like initially, we have to take a very measured approach in figuring out how is this really going to impact workers in the organization? How can this fit into the processes that they have now and provide value and not be a tangent? How can we get quality information out of this versus like, here's a whole bunch of AI generated fluff that looks great on the surface, but like when you really drill down into it, it's just that, it's just fluff. So there's some challenges like adoption wise there, but people are coming to us seeking it out. And so that's a little bit different in the adoption story.
It is interesting that you say that. It's very, very true, because if you look at the other tools, the M365 platforms, whatever you are in, and the adoption rate is always trying to go into the clients, whoever the client is within the organization. Sometimes IT wants to deploy something that the business really having a hard time adopting it. And we're trying to push, we're trying to give them what the benefits are.
Yeah.
What you're saying is now it's the other way around, which is really interesting.
Yeah. I can echo that, because we've seen that in our organization. Like, you're right. Usually we're chasing the people to adopt stuff. There are all the different adoption mechanisms that, you speak about in many conferences and that we use. But yeah, this is the opposite.
For Copilot, but do you think, I'm going to be honest, do you think that that's going to last? Do you think that the arc that we're seeing around Copilot and the mad interest around Copilot from an adoption perspective, generally, when you see a user adoption arc for something that is this groundbreaking, that's this disrupting in the marketplace, and I mean disrupting in a good way around Copilot, I think that you have initially a monster level of interest. But then I think that one of the challenges is that people might want to adopt, but if they don't crystallize on how, they can use Copilot effectively to solve their business needs day to day. And if it doesn't work the first few times in the way that they want, or they don't put in the right parameters to get out what they need, sometimes that adoption has a way of dropping off precipitously, and you end up with, a hockey stick, and then and you
You
fall
kind
off
of
the
hit the
cliff.
top of that hype cycle and
So
then.
I was about to say that's the Gardner hype cycle right there. And that study by Gardner for generative AI definitely applies to Copilot. So that's actually something that I share like within my organization as part of like our onboarding and our community our Copilot community check-ins to keep that engagement going. So I've actually blogged about the Gardner hype cycle. There's a few articles Microsoft's referenced it.
I've never heard of the Gartner hype cycle.
Oh, no. Yeah.
So there's the initial excitement. That's the beginning of the process. We have this new tool and it's amazing and it does some really great things. But to your point, after a while, it starts to drop off because it's like, how many meeting summaries can I really run? How many email replies can I send with Copilot? And then users kind of start to fall back into their normal business routines. And they may not be using Copilot for drafting a report or for analyzing data, or they might run into a barrier. It doesn't do what I want it to do today, or I'm not getting the results out of it I want. So that goes into the trough of disillusionment. That's when you start to bottom out after that initial excitement wears off. And then you got the slope of enlightenment. And you're trying to get back to the plateau of productivity. And that's where the real work in the user adoption story begins, because now we have to connect to purpose. You've seen some of what the capabilities are, but now we have to find a way to implement this in your business process in a meaningful way that we can repeat, that we can build some muscle memory around, and then possibly scale it out to other teammates with similar roles. And so that's where things like learning to measure the ROI and learning how to share with users what the return on that is going to be for them, what's in it for me with them. That's where the hard work really starts. And I've seen that in our Copilot adoption journey, because we've done it in phases. We've onboarded different groups and it's repeating over and over and over. John, my co-host, he's also seen similar results in his organization, where after that initial excitement, now we're back to kind of where we were prior to this, and we're falling back into, I don't want to say bad habits, but previous habits.
No, but it is really typical, because you can always start off with something is fresh and new, and you're likely to get from an Everett Rogers classic diffusion models, right? You're likely to get the innovators or the pioneers that are going to jump on it just because it's new technology and they can't wait to get a hold of it. Then you're going to have a slightly wider band, and then you get into the early majority. And in order to be able to actually drive change, technological change across the company, you need a vast majority, about 2/3 of the majority of your users who are not laggards, to actually adopt it. And that is that jumping the chasm point where you've got to drive that change. And most often, I think what people forget is that Copilot can be great. It can have all the features in the world, but you still need change management and adoption, and you can't stop those services just because you think, hey, we've spent 2 months talking about Copilot, shouldn't that be enough? Or we spent 2 weeks, or at most companies, 2 hours talking about Copilot, and that should be enough. You've got to keep on driving it, because adoption only happens when your employees decide for themselves that Copilot has a practical application and improves their lives, and they choose it. And every employee gets to choose it differently, and every employee is going to choose it based on different factors.
And there's on those factors, there's also what can Copilot do for me as an individual?
Yes.
But now some organizations are really starting to look at what can Copilot do for we as a team, as a business unit, as an organization. And that's where we're really having to dig down into these activities, these processes, and figure out, does it make sense to insert this tool into this process? Is it going to add complexity, or is it going to simplify this process, and then figure out how can we scale this from one business unit to another? So there's definitely that me versus we component that I think some of the organizations that have implemented it, like mine, are starting to try to figure out.
You mentioned ROI a couple of times.
Yeah, I was
What
gonna
have
ask
you
about
seen
that.
in terms of being effective ways to measure ROI for something like Copilot?
So I was going to ask you all that.
You talked a little bit about that
Define
before.
what we mean by ROI, because I want to make sure whenever we talk about an acronym, we need to define it. So when we say ROI, we mean return on investment,
Correct.
which could mean
Exactly.
different things for different companies, just to be
Right.
clear. Return on investment could mean, are we justifying the overall total ownership cost
Right.
of having the technology or the tool, total cost of ownership or the
Right.
TCO?
Right.
Return on investment could also mean, is it worth the opportunity cost of what else we could do with our time
Right.
or our dollar or our technology funding? So
Right.
making sure that we just define what we mean.
Great point. Great points. To put a finer point. When I think ROI, I think a little more narrowly for the moment. I think all of what you mentioned is appropriate, but for the moment, a lot of our customers are trying to think about, okay, Copilot is going to cost me X in license fees.
Correct.
How do I justify that spend in the license fees? Yes, there's absolutely the larger total cost of ownership and the opportunity cost, but for the minute,
Business case for justifying the expense.
exactly. I hear about
Exactly.
it in terms of, okay, we need to build a business case to justify the expense, the license expense, because it is expensive. And we are talking right now, Copilot for Microsoft 365, I assume. So yes, from an ROI
Yeah,
perspective,
so-
I think it's those things.
Exactly, like we said, like if I'm spending $30 a user a month, how much I'm saving from productivity, from creativity, everything else.
Yeah.
This is where the actual real measurement will happen. Yes, is it worth spending that $30? And how do we measure that ROI?
Mhm.
So the oversimplified measurement that I've seen tossed around is if it returns 1 hour over the course of a month, essentially it pays for itself based off of
Per user.
Per user.
Per user.
If it saves 1 hour per month, it pays for the cost per user. But that's not something we can take to an executive. That's not something we can take to accounting and say, well, we returned 1 hour of this person's time, using
Yes.
this tool.
Prove it to me.
Yeah.
They want more.
Yeah, exactly.
Like what's the actual return going to be?
Yeah.
So I've actually leaned heavily on Sarah's blog for a number of years because she's got a really good blog post. I believe it was from 2014.
And it's got a good title,
A Land of Confusion.
just like the song,
Yeah.
Genesis, Phil Collins, Genesis, whatever,
Collins.
Land of Confusion. If you bing it, it'll pop up.
So I've leaned on that one for a long time, and it's because I come from the workflow world, workflows, forms, and automation. And I stumbled upon that blog post years ago. And when we were having conversations about how do we measure the actual return on investment for Copilot, I was like, well, we have to figure out like how long does it take a process to occur? How many times are we executing this process within a given time period? How do we measure the hourly rate or the man hours that are inputted into that, and then getting some kind of baseline. So the blog post you have has that as a simplified
Correct.
Formula in there. The number of iterations, the number or the time per iteration, the number of iterations in a time period, an hourly cost associated with
Correct.
that, and then there's your baseline.
Your bill rate, your bill rate, run rate for running that process
Right.
in a year or in a 6-month period.
So then we take that and then we go and we try to execute the same process using Copilot.
Copilot.
But we have to put on our business analyst hat. Is where's Copilot going to fit best into this process?
Yes.
And where's it actually going to give us a positive return? The first couple of times we try to do this, you might run longer on the iteration because you're trying to figure out how to fit Copilot into it. But then once you've implemented it, you go back and you start seeing those time savings. And so then you can get kind of a baseline. So like, for example, in my organization, we had somebody run that for one of our schools of medicine, and they were looking at adjusting course syllabuses. To run a single portion of this process, it would take upwards of 8 hours to review a syllabus, identify outcomes and objectives, update the syllabus and corresponding materials. And they were having to do this over 150 classes. So 8 hours for a single iteration of this, an individual instructor could be responsible for 8 or 10 of these within a time period, that's 8 or 10 business days devoted to just that process. So they started looking at how they could get Copilot involved in this. The syllabus is just basically a Word document. They were able to point Copilot at it, define what an outcome is versus like an objective is, and then it distilled that down almost immediately, and it was pretty spot on. A little bit of minor tweaking, and then they were able to take it into the next part, which was like adjusting that course material. They, in their initial studies on that, were able to drop that time from 8 hours down to like 30 minutes per course. So that represents significant time savings. They could potentially do all of these in a single day, and then there's 8 days back in their month to go into something else.
That's a great example that feels very concrete in how you measure it.
So we have to find other examples like that. We have to find other business cases where we can maybe do some similar activities. In this case, it's kind of heavy around like Word and like,
Content creation.
Working with Copilot on things like Excel reports. It's different. The learning curve's different over there.
Different skill set.
Exactly. And some of those users, especially the experienced Excel users, they look at Copilot and they can do some of those things faster than what Copilot can return it today.
That's right.
And so they are kind of hesitant to embrace it. And then there's like other barriers that you might face, like, oh, I'm doing this process, but some of the data is over here in this external system. So how do we get that involved in it? So there's some work that's to be done there. But I think like going back, it's like you figure out the time per process, the number of iterations. We try to assign a cost analysis to that. Then we get a baseline. And then from there, we can kind of work through how we can start returning value.
So I think we've looked at ROI similarly, but with different words, because we've tried to help some clients with this as well. The way and I think this is very similar to what you guys have described, is we look at what roles in an organization could benefit from Copilot for Microsoft 365, right? It's often content creation or people that deal with content, but we look at those roles across finance teams, legal teams, HR teams, engineering teams, whatever the right departments or functions within an organization, right? So you define these roles as part of certain business groups. Then you look for activities that those roles do that are time consuming, that are repetitive, that could benefit from some level of automation or assistance. So similar to the workflow example that you've used. So you get these basically these use cases. And then we think about, okay, if a digital assistant was to assist with this use case, what kind of are the actions or prompts that you could use to facilitate that use case through a digital assistant? And we try to estimate, okay, if I had a digital assistant helping this role with this use case, what kind of time savings could we look at? And those time savings can be either, it takes you less time to do this thing, so you could do more of it, or I can use that time to do other things. Again, I think very similar to what you guys have described with different words, and then basically use that to build the business case. You've got roles, you've got use cases, those roles associated to functions, and you've got potential time savings and what you could do with that time. We're still, I think, working it through. I think it's still early days for building these use cases, but it's formulating. Like we have seen some success, like the example you used on content creation for medical courses. I think you said that sounds like a good concrete one in that case.
So I think what you're describing is the scenario-based approach to it. And Microsoft's got some really good content on that in their adoption.microsoft.com for Copilot. There's some scenarios for like different roles, and you can take that as kind of a baseline to kind of start and look for similar roles within your organization and then figure out how it's going to apply. But it's identifying the scenario in the organization and then looking at for other roles that have similar scenarios. They might be in different departments, but they're doing similar kind of content.
Correct.
As you were describing that, it reminded me that as part of like the Copilot Success Kit that Microsoft's created, one of the things that they point out are some of the kind of quick win business units within the organization. And like at the top of that, marketing was one of them that they pointed out. It's really good for like drafting copy and ideation around
content creation.
And campaigning and whatnot. HR was another one I remember from that list from Microsoft with the
Okay.
type of things that like they deal with creating job descriptions. They have a
Yeah.
whole bunch of samples. And if you're prompting like a one shot or a few shot is where you use examples of previous content to
Mhm.
draft something new. So you've already kind of got a structure around that. When I first saw like Copilot and generative AI, immediately I thought it would be really cool if I could plug my company's technical specifications into this, or our marketing team style guide
Mhm.
into this,
Yes.
so that I could give it an idea and it already knows the terms, the phrases, the
Yeah.
word
Mhm.
choice, how we write, and then
Formatting.
and the formatting, and then start to create new content around that. And now we're kind of getting there with Copilot Studio. We
Yeah.
can point it to our style guide
To certain content.
and then walk through brief conversation, gather some
Mhm.
requirements, and then it spits out perfect copy every single time. So it's finding things like that, ways to plug it in that could really provide a lot of value.
What about, I know it can be measured from one single place, but you can also measure some ROI on an individual basis using Viva Insight. You can go into your own Viva Insight as well. This one way, I know it's can't be measured on an org level because we don't have still the tools, everything to kind of go and say, how many documents did Antonio kind of run with Copilot? Or how many teams summary did Mike do? But on an individual level, you can go into your Viva Insight for your Copilot dashboard, and you can kind of gather some information on an individual basis, but it's not an org-wide. But that calls also can have an indication, to your point, Andy, that if you've saved an hour a month, that you paid off
Mhm.
that license. If I go into my Viva Insight and say, oh yeah, well, I've used it on a few occasions and I created a document, and that document usually takes me 2 days to create, and I did it in like half a day.
Mhm.
That's another way to kind of
Yeah.
measure that.
Mhm.
Like if I was to take the 1 hour, it saved me an hour a month to an executive, the response I would get would be, that's it.
Mm.
Like an hour a month doesn't justify for me $30 per user per month.
But we also
Sure, it
have to-
does,
But we also have to think about the overall investment, because the one
Agreed.
piece that you cannot get away from is, in order to have this success with Copilot, yes, there's a small percentage of our users that are innovators or pioneers
Yes.
that are going to glom onto something like Copilot and figure out how to use it successfully. Most people, however, are a little bit more need more time to warm up to the idea. I call them green dot, yellow dot, red dot. Green dot, as soon as I know it's out there, I'm going to be motivated intrinsically to go out there and to be able to determine how to use it. Most people are more yellowish in the sense that they have a little bit of caution up front. Maybe I need you to paint me a story about how this goes. Maybe I'm going to feel more comfortable if Antonio or Andy or Mike or somebody that I trust is going to recommend for me how to use it. Maybe I need you to feed it to me in bite-sized pieces and make it look attractive on a plate initially. Maybe I need training. Maybe I need a YouTube video to watch on how to do it. There's a cost not only from a licensing perspective, but then of course you've got to have someone who's going to help get people excited about, which is the very thing that you're doing. So I think it's also important because companies, I think, almost always will undervalue what I call the tumbler from an adoption perspective, the person who's going to get people excited about it. And that could be an IT person, it could be a product manager, it could be, what's your title at work?
Senior technical specialist, enterprise collaboration specialist.
Enterprise collaboration specialist. It can be called all kinds of things, right? But the job is always to be able to help connect technology and what it can do to a user, what they need, make it relevant, and answer the what's in it for me, for that user. And that is a cost in addition to everything else. So I think that we should take that into account, because you need to pay that cost
Great.
from now until you're going to stop using Copilot. It's not a pay it for a little while. You still have to invest over time to maintain and get new people on board.
So I have a controversial question for all of you that's not about inboxes. Which are you, green dot, yellow dot, or red dot? To your thing.
Green dot.
Green dot?
I really like embracing new technology and exploring.
Early
and
adopter.
yeah, but so if I can get my hands on it early and play with it and learn it, I'm
Okay.
all for that.
Okay.
Mike?
Mike, which one are you?
100% green dot. Just go for it right away.
What are you?
I was going to ask you what you.
Yellow, because in some cases I might be excited about it, but I may not have the time to be able to take a look at it immediately or engage with it right away. I'm also well known for saying, I know that I have friends that are going to look into this first. So I might say, hey, what do you think about this? And I can say for you and for Mike, for example, I've asked you before, what's your experience been with this? I would never follow Mike's guidance about anything related to his inbox.
Especially inbox.
However,
That's
there
why you're
are
still
many
yellow and I'm
things-
green.
Yeah. But there are many things that I do ask for Mike's opinion or help on kind of in that moving walkway. So I would say that in often cases, I'm like a nice light yellow.
Okay.
Okay. What about you?
I am, I think, a deep yellow, because being a fairly technical technology person, I tend to be very skeptical about technology, right? Because I know where things can go wrong, or I can anticipate where things can go wrong. So I'm not an early adopter because I got a lot on my plate. I got a lot to do, and I don't like being slowed down by technology that's not fully baked yet. That drives me insane. So I'm intentionally a deep yellow because I like stuff to be proven out, for bugs to be found. I do like to learn from other folks like all of you, your experiences. Sometimes I need to adopt something early because I'm being asked about it in my role. But usually I'm like, I'll monitor, I'll see how it goes, I'll learn from others, and I'll be a slightly later adopter. So I would say a deep yellow.
So I think that this has been a great conversation. I think that for this episode, I think that we have covered adoption and ROI. I'm going to make a bold suggestion while we're recording that, Andy, I would love to be able to have you back to talk about a whole different level of Copilot, because I think that one of the things that we didn't address, but would be a whole episode, is how you approach Copilot from an organizational perspective. Piloting, choosing who's going to pilot, choosing who to roll out, because unlike Copilot for Microsoft 365, unlike many other tools, for example, Viva, either some of the entire Viva suite or some of the Viva bundles or SharePoint Premium, right? You're licensing every person with an M365 license in your company. You're either in or you are out. But for Copilot, I think many companies, based on the cost, some smaller organizations may be buying it for everyone, but I think especially large enterprise customers are choosing to take a more gradual model, or they're looking to pilot and test it. And I would love to see if you would come back to talk about that, because I think that would be fascinating for our users to talk about.
Yeah, I would be more than happy to come back and talk about that.
Awesome.
Perfect.
There are so many topics to talk about Copilot, so we can't really fit it in just one episode. So yes, we'll be very happy to have you back.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Andy.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Mike, for joining us virtually.
Yes.
Next time you should be here.
Yeah, don't have too much fun without me.
Right.
We'll send you some.
Send you lots of pictures. Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Bye.